Aisha Adams, and I'd like to welcome you to the Asheville View. And today we have Dr. Tiece Ruffin to discuss with us equitable education strategies. How are you today?
Yes, I'm doing well. Happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
I am so excited to share your wisdom with our community. I feel like I don't see you enough. And so I'm so excited about this.
Likewise.
So I wanted to ask you, what's the opportunity gap and how do we now identify the role education has played in creating this gap?
Yes, I'm glad we're focusing on the opportunity gap, long overdue in our society, in our location right now in Asheville, in the region, really in our nation. The opportunity gap is about an inequitable education system, not kids, right? So the opportunity gap focuses on fixing a system that's inequitable, a system that has unequal access to the curriculum, to teachers, high quality teachers and resources. It also really focuses on factors that should not determine whether a person succeeds or not or has the opportunity to learn, but it does include factors like race, like your English language proficiency, like your socioeconomic status. All of those are the opportunity gap factors that contribute to an unequal access to learning, an inequitable education system.
Thanks for clarifying that for me because, when I was teaching, it was called the achievement gap. And so I
Yeah.
wonder about the change in language and then how we then keep holding schools accountable in that as we change it away from achievement gap to opportunity gap.
Absolutely. It's time for that change. I mean, the achievement gap talked about the differences between the academic performance of kids, but we often looked at standardized test scores. And we know from research that standardized test scores have racist beginnings. And we also know that they're ripe with cultural biases. So finally, we've shifted from let's stop blaming the kids and let's stop comparing folks in subgroups based on racist and culturally biased instruments and actually look at there's an unequal access to opportunity to learn based on factors and identities that shouldn't be a part of an inequitable system. You know, when I think about this inequitable system, I go back to Horace Mann and the 19th century, where he's considered the father of American public education. And it was started in Massachusetts, but it wasn't started with everyone in mind. It was not started inclusively. It was segregated. It was unequal from the beginning. So yes, the opportunity gap really focuses on an equitable system, one that was not set up for everyone and is still needs to be dismantled and still where we need to center equitable opportunities for all.
Thank you so much for clarifying that definition for us. So, what systemic barriers do you feel we have within this opportunity gap that can be closed? And how do we do that?
Yes, so often literature around the opportunity to learn gap talks about do we have, the resources available, and it looks at school funding. So we need to think about our schools with resources in terms of funding, but also supports that's necessary from mental health supports, from social workers to experienced and highly qualified teachers and so forth. It also looks at the curriculum. So when we talk about the opportunity gap, what is our curriculum like? Is it still the same, hegemonic Eurocentric curriculum, or is it one that's really relevant to our culturally plural society today? And I think in a lot of school systems, it's the same old Eurocentric and hegemonic curriculum from the olden days that hasn't really been transformed to recognize and address that we have a culturally plural society. And it also talks about teachers. Do we have effective and experienced teachers? Do we have teachers that understand notions of culturally affirming teaching, where our kids are affirmed and believe they can do it? They don't have to, deal with stereotype threat, afraid that they're going to conform to some negative stereotype about their group or feel that they're inferior. Because if teachers were using culturally affirming pedagogy, culturally relevant, if they were being responsive to the needs, aware of their cultural dynamics, not only would students be motivated, students would see their value, they would feel honored, and they would feel like it's a braver space for them to be, to actually learn. So I really think we have to transform some of these barriers where we want to continue on with the same old curriculum, or we want to have inexperienced and novice teachers in schools that are predominantly serving African American and Latinx youth. And that's what the research says, that we often have inexperienced teachers who are not effective or high quality teachers in certain school systems serving certain populations. And also curriculum. I mean, what are we doing with the curriculum? I think I've said that already, but just to emphasize that the curriculum is important.
It's the heartbeat.
Yes.
It's the heartbeat. What I wanted to ask you about this question, because I do want to go a little bit deeper. I've read that you talked about, okay, you think the change is systematic change. Then we need really good teachers, but we also need safe classrooms. And I wanted you to talk a moment about building a safe classroom.
Yes. How do we have these safe classrooms where kids that look like me, that look like my Black male sons, that are identity safe spaces where their social identities are not barriers? And so when I think of identity safe classrooms, teachers use those social identities. I mean, as Black people, we have swag, we have drip, we are phenomenal. We come from a rich intellectual tradition. You know, we're all that in a bag of chips. So why then does our social identity always yield something that's negative? So if teachers tap in to our social identity as an asset and create a place where they actually learn, they learn from us, they get input from the students and the parents. I call that being a responsive educator. You just don't have a bunch of kids and say, well, I know they come from this background and that background, and you see all the deficits. No, see that beautiful Blackness as an asset, tap into it in your instruction, learn from parents and youth how you can bring that into the classroom, and then that's your stage. That's the place that makes me feel like this is an identity safe place where I'm valued, I'm honored, my identity is welcomed, it's embraced, and it's also used in my learning. So I'll feel like that is a braver space to be in, or a safer space to be in when that's honored, versus someone coming with so much bias or so much stereotype around the negativity surrounding my identity, then we're not going to get anywhere, because that means they're looking down on me and they're not seeing my richness, they're not seeing my assets, and they're not seeing my strengths. So when I talk to teachers about how do you create this identity safe space, how do you get this information? And then how do you actually put it in practice? And then you circle back. It's not a one time, oh, let me ask you, Miss Aisha, right? It's like continuous, getting this feedback and then changing, not sticking to a one size fits all to say, well, I asked them at the beginning and I got input from the student and parent. I'm learning about this culture. I'm learning about how to be culturally relevant. And then all of a sudden it's bygone after the first week of class. No, it's going back, looping back to it time and time again, getting feedback from both student and parent. And then for the teacher, checking the results. What are the outcomes of your instruction? Do you need to make a change?
Right.
Like, don't say, oh, I don't, no, they need to change to me. No, yeah. You may need to make a change.
So what I'm hearing you say, one of the things I always say is that classroom should be a learning laboratory, that it should be trial and error. You should actually be running actionable, action research in your classroom on a regular basis. You should be implementing culturally competent content on a regular basis. And you cannot do it by yourself because bias exists. And that's the importance of bringing in other partners, other community members, other cultures, and taking a back seat. I think one of the things that teachers forget to do is to be led. That's the biggest thing. Can you be led by your students and their convictions and the richness of their history? So I think that's super important. And I'm so glad to hear you talk about that. So my next question is, I also have this thing about the value of education in America. So I know that you have very deep roots in Africa. You work and teach and do your scholarship there. And the way that I understand education there, the teacher is held to a high regard and standard. And here in America, the teacher is more so looked as a support benefit. And so I want to talk about the role of schools should be playing in the community as leaders for how we lead our children. And so my question to you is really like, what role should the community play in helping schools close the opportunity gap and restoring the role of the teacher as a leader?
Oh my, that is powerful. Yes, my experience in Ghana was that the teacher was respected. The teaching was seen as a noble profession. When I entered a K-12 classroom, the kids actually stood up and greeted me and welcomed me and did not take their seat until they were told to be seated.
Wow.
Um, Even at a university there, graduate students would approach me to carry my things to class. That, oh no, Dr. Ruffin, let me carry your bag, let me carry your purse. And it didn't matter, male or female, just treated with so much respect. So I think here in the United States, we have to see that it's important to partner with the community. And when I say partner with the community, I'm talking about reach out, figure out how we can work together to accomplish our shared goals. As I said, those systemic barriers that are there in terms of resources, curriculum, and teacher, I mean, there are additional barriers like with discipline, pushing kids out. They have to partner with the community, especially in discipline. Ask community, what are some ways we can transform discipline? We keep pushing out Black and brown kids. So they have unequal access to learning, because if they're not there, are they learning? When they have the highest rate of out of school suspensions and referrals to the criminal justice system. What have we talked? Have we talked to community members to find out what is best practice? What can we do to partner to do something else beyond suspension? I also look forward to community to lead the way.
Can we say
Um,
beyond suspension and in school suspension? Because I want to let parents know that a lot of times when your kid gets in trouble and they go to in school suspension, they're still being institutionalized in this one room box where they are losing a lot of education and being pulled from instruction and losing their resources that come from that standard American like process, right? Um,
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly, both out of school and into school suspension. So we've tried to retrofit, we've tried to figure out what do we do differently. You know, there's restorative justice, there's transformative justice, but point blank, has the school systems reached out to community to say, let's transform this, reimagine this. What if we do away with suspensions altogether? Let it not even exist, out of school or in school. What does that look like? I also see community as leading the way. Some systems are sometimes so bureaucratic and resistant to change that it will also take community to say, let's be self-determined and come up with an alternate model. Some may say a parallel model. For me, I say something that is built by Black people, for the good of Black people. That we have the expertise and we have the experience to be able to do that. So I also see community as not only partnering, but leading the way sometimes with best fits for our kids from our
yeah.
own expertise, because people try to slight that community doesn't have indigenous knowledge and expertise because you don't have a credential, but there is so much wisdom, and you know that as well. I know sharing that with you is like preaching to the choir, that you know we possess as community a wealth of expertise, and we don't necessarily have to have an MED, PhD, or BA
No, and I
to
think
say
when
we know
those
that.
things marry, I grew up in a community. So if Miss Jones was at the school for the day volunteering, she was gonna tell my mama, like I would do what I'm supposed to do. And her discipline was just a look, where my teacher might have to do a little bit more than just look, right?
Yes, yes,
So I really appreciate, especially here in Asheville, we have such a rich culture of knowing, is what I call. They already know the answers to the questions, and it's about us as leaders in the classroom and teachers in schools really pulling those ways of knowing out, and then pulling them into policies and procedures that eliminate racism and bias in the policies and the systems. And so I believe the community should definitely be an advocate for that. But I think it's up to the schools to lead the way, to invite community in. And I think it's up to schools to create space so that when we come in, we don't feel like a disruption, but we feel included and honored in that way. And I wanted to talk more about that with you because you do so much as a professor at UNCA. So you're in that system. And I also see you making an impact on the system itself. So will you tell me how, what initiatives you're working on and how we can kind of keep up with what you're doing?
Yes. So right now, I've partnered with Asheville City Schools to lead workshops for school leaders around equitable discipline. So that's something that'll be happening in the next couple of weeks throughout the next few months. I'm also working with the Asheville City Schools Foundation to facilitate opportunities for parent advocacy, because I do believe that parents and caregivers are the kids' first teachers. We have special dynamics today in Asheville, and I'm sure not just particular to Asheville, where we have grandparents and great grandparents as caregivers in our communities. And so parents need to have the tools. I've heard the cry to have tools, to be equipped to advocate for their children in public education. So a lot of my work right now is with local school districts and the Asheville City Schools Foundation. I'm doing some work with AmeriCorps, where I'm also doing some equity training with folks that will be in our community and really throughout Western North Carolina as AmeriCorps Vista. So that's exciting for me to work on.
I
Equity,
was a
diversity.
Vista, by the way, just so you know. I was a
Oh, you
Vista
were?
girl. Yes,
Oh,
I
yeah.
worked in DC in the nonprofit sector. Got all of my nonprofit training from the Vistas training program. So yeah, definitely. So
Yeah.
I
So,
appreciate that work that you're doing because those are college students that are coming into the workforce. And we already know that students are leaving education and they're not as prepared as they can be. And I really value that training, and I value having someone like you in there setting the tone for what the next group of professionals in that nonprofit sector um, does. That's important and it's
yeah.
special.
So I'm excited about that. That's, until December, some of the things that I'm working on, as you said, with partnering, leading the way, accountability. Aisha, I've been really frustrated when I often hear, especially in this area, that certain parents hold power and influence. And
Hmm.
it really upsets me because I look at the data and I know that, as I said earlier today, standardized test scores have racist beginnings and have cultural biases, but they do share something. It shares some information. So when I look at Asheville City Schools in Buncombe County and the reading proficiency rate of students, and then I always hear people talk about, in particular, North Asheville parents or certain West Asheville parent block as having power and influence. I've never heard about people saying we should be cautious or we should think about the influence of Black parents in Asheville. I
Yes.
haven't heard that in 11 years.
Well, I will just
So,
tell
yeah.
you from my experience of being both a teacher, a Black teacher in Asheville City Schools and a parent in Asheville City Schools, that the real work is for the parent to advocate. Advocate, advocate, advocate. And it's unfortunate, but it's our responsibilities to learn how to advocate in a system that is often foreign to us. And so we need wonderful spirit guides who love our kids, who love our community, and who have our best interests at heart, like yourself, to lead us. I'm so happy to be in community with you, and I'm so grateful to have had you on the Asheville View today. So
Yeah.
thanks for coming.
Likewise, thank you for the opportunity to share. I look forward for a future opportunity. So much more we could discuss and share.
Yes, thank you.